Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests. Earlier this evening, I had a little handout I gave everybody that just lists some of the volunteer opportunities that I'll be discussing tonight, and a few extras that we'll have time to get to, as along with the URLs. If anything I speak about strikes your fancy, please look it up and volunteer. The Chesapeake Bay. It means many different things to many different people. To the Indians, it loosely translated into Great Shellfish Bay. To some people, it might mean spending a day with your family at a beach, or enjoying a succulent feast of locally caught seafood, or perhaps sailing on her sheltered waters with friends, or just taking a lazy day fishing at the pier. Now, I know I've enjoyed the bounty of the bay for most of my life, and I hope to enjoy it for the rest of my life, as well as the generations that are going to follow me. Now, we all know, or all heard, that the bay is in trouble. From her peak, the oyster population has decreased by 98%. 50% of her forested shorelines have been cut down. Less than 50% of her wetlands still exist. And 90% of the seagrasses, which used to cover the floor of the bay, have disappeared. So I've asked myself, what can I do to help the bay? I want to do more than just give money. I want to get my hands dirty. I want to feel like I'm part of the solution. So I did a little research to find out what volunteering opportunities actually exist, and tonight I'm going to share them with you. Through organizations like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, several opportunities exist for us to help the bay. Through general cleanup projects, public speaking, stream and shore restoration, oyster restoration, seagrass restoration. These are all projects which we could participate in. Every first Saturday in June, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation organized Save the Bay Day. Over 7,000 volunteers in the state of Virginia get out and clean up Virginia's waterways along the beach and on the water. Typically, they recover 120 tons of garbage from our waterways. Mark your calendars. It's a Saturday. Weather will be nice. Next, public speaking. What could there be a better opportunity for a Toastmaster? The Chesapeake Bay Foundation needs volunteers to take their message to the public. Different civic organizations request public speakers to come to an event, could be a lunch and learn or a Boy Scout troop, to learn about the problems that the Bay is having, what are the issues, and how can they get involved to help solve those issues. Chesapeake Bay Foundation provides training for personnel, and you get to do it at the convenience of your calendar. Now, nothing is more important to preventing soil erosion and rain runoff into streams, which eventually flow down into the bay, than planting trees along the shorelines and creating buffer zones. Every spring and fall, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation organizes groups to go out and plant trees along streams. These usually occur on weekends and take up about a half a day. This weekend in Louisa County, Virginia, a group of volunteers are going to plant 700 saplings along a stream that eventually, its waters lead to the York River. On the sheet there, I have a URL where you can check a calendar when opportunities in the future arise that might interest you. Now, one of the most important creatures that live in the bay is the oyster, and as I spoke earlier, the oyster population today is 2% of what it was at the late 1800s. There are several oyster restoration projects going on that volunteers can get involved with. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation runs an oyster farm over in Gloucester on Sarah's Creek. They need volunteers throughout the year just to help them run the farm. The farm takes seedlings that they purchase from commercial hatcheries. They grow them throughout the year until they're mature, and then the following year they plant them on oyster reef sanctuaries. Also, there's an oyster restoration project at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science at Gloucester Point, where they grow oyster saps and put them out on reefs as well. Now, when a little baby oyster is born, it's a tiny little larvae, and it floats in the water and eventually sinks down the water column, where it will attach itself and eventually grow into an adult oyster. Well, it has to attach itself to a hard surface. And that's why you'll see them on bridge pilings and so forth, but they prefer to attach themselves to other oyster shells. And unfortunately, there aren't enough oyster shells in Virginia's tributaries to make a home for all these little baby oysters. So the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has started a program to recycle oyster shells, and they need volunteers. They need volunteers to go out to restaurants and to events like seafood festivals and oyster roasts to collect the leftover oyster shells from the people that have enjoyed their oysters. These shells are then taken to a central location where they're sterilized and eventually used in an oyster restoration project and returned to the bay. Now, as equally important as oysters are to the bay, so is subaqueous vegetation. And there are two major projects. One is run by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, which is called Masses for Grasses. It's a perfect opportunity with a family with small children to get involved. In February, you go get a kit to grow wild celery. You grow it at your home, then in May, everybody gets together and they have a mass planting in one of the tributaries of the bay. Also, for the more adventurous, there is a project that takes place every year over, would be great for you, over in the coastal bays of Virginia, where they use volunteers to snorkel and dive for underwater eelgrass seeds. The volunteers will collect between 10 and 20 million seeds, and they use these to do plantings in the York and James Rivers. Now, progress is being made. The oyster sanctuary reefs that have been developed have grown beyond their original plantings. Volunteers are helping cover the barren bay bottom with new eelgrass. And thousands of people get out every year and help beautify the shorelines of Virginia's waters. So please consider joining the force of volunteers with me to make a difference and help bring the bay back to life. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.